Now, access for deer hunting. Everyone knows it's critical. It's so important. But a lot of times, Dylan and I, we get, and Joe and Kevin, we get to go see properties all the time. People that spend a lot of money for their properties, set up their properties. They want us to set up their strategic hunting in the property. In fact, that's the lowest hole in the bucket. People invite us on their land, really design their property for them in a habitat sense, whether it's food plots, bedding areas, cuttings, travel corridors, switchgrass, water holes, mock scrapes, everything where it goes lays out. When really it boils down to how can you hunt the property, how can you assemble those improvements within that hunting plan, and the hunting becomes the lowest hole in the bucket. Because if you're accessing poorly on your land, you'll spook deer. A lot of times, especially on private land, people are making habitat improvements, they're building this, building that, adding a food plot here, and they have so many improvements located incorrectly or poorly on their land that you can't get on and off the property without spooking deer. So it boils down to access, and sometimes we're our own worst enemy. I want to go over a really good access strategy that has worked for me for many, many years, and I still see people, even when I go to clients, and clients are where a lot of these ideas come from, because Dylan and I go to about 80 clients a piece. Joe and Kevin about the same. We'll go over to over 300 client properties as a whole this year, between everybody. And so we get to see this stuff all the time. We get to see the same questions. These are serious people. I mean, they spend a lot of money on their property, and they're having us come out. It's important to them. But we see this a lot, and this access strategy is something that I see lacking on a lot of properties. That access property is, I want to see you access through the woods, a lot of times, through the woods if you can. Woods trails, I love interior woods trails on properties. People say, should we get rid of these? Say, oh, absolutely not. Use them all season long. Plus, when it's dark hours, great time to access through the woods. When it's daylight hours, access through the fields. This is a great stand location example of this. And I like going to this one because I know Dylan has a lot of pieces of this, aerial photos. He's continually taking drone shots. We have a switchgrass field over here that helps our access, hides it. We don't want deer bedding there though. We have a food plot up behind us, behind me right here. You can see the stand. Nice family tradition stand right up there in the tree. This is one we set up last year. Water hole right down behind Dylan. I'll walk down there in a second. But the bottom line is with this stand, we have a food plot about 70 yards behind the stand location that way. No bedding in between there. We don't create any bedding there. On the flip side, we have bedding all the way down the ridge. We have bedding cut over here about 200 yards away. We have bedding about 150 yards away that's cut over there. We have bedding over there that's cut. I hope you can see we're kind of in the middle of everything right here. We're in the middle of bedding. That means we have a lower trail down here that just happened. It came with the property. We maintained it, mowed it, and we have an upper trail that's only about 100 yards away in some areas, 60 yards away, but it's on the field edge. The strategy is during the daylight hours, we walk along the field edge. We can even walk out in the food plot. It doesn't matter. We come through this open timber, we get in the stand. That's where we blow our scent. The deer are pinpointed to go to that food plot over here or go that way. So when we're sitting here, we're blowing our scent back up into the same area we walk through, which isn't the food plot, but it's just off to the edge. Then after dark, if we're sitting here in the afternoon, we walk out on the lower trail. The lower trail would, if we were walking during the daylight, expose us to bedded deer. But we're coming in during the dark hours one way through the woods, and then during the daylight hours, we're going out through the fields. And I hope that makes sense. It's a very, very basic concept, but critical and often missed when planning a hunting strategy on your property. Now, point this out. So if I was coming in here for a morning sit, I'm going to walk right through this lower trail that would otherwise expose me to deer bedding, but they're all on the field somewhere or on the edges. And I'm going to cut right over and get in the stand. I'm going to enjoy a sit for 4 or 5 hours. And then when I get out of the stand, I'm going straight to the field edge because I know deer are not bedded on the field. I could walk through the food plot if I wanted to at those hours and go right around all this cover and get out of here. The afternoon, it's opposite. Opposite meaning when I come in the afternoon, instead of using this lower road like I did in the morning, I'm going to go right back through the fields. Could walk through the food plot if I wanted to, get in the stand, gets dark, and then I'm going to use this lower road to get out, walking through bedding area, alongside bedding area, because every deer in the woods is out in the fields already feeding somewhere. That's why major food sources are so critical. Major food sources not only dictate where deer bed, does closer to the food sources, bucks back in the interior resources of your property, more remote areas that that aren't exposed to hunting pressure. But food sources also dictate your access, because then you know deer are focusing here during those gray hours, or they're bedding here during the daylight hours. They're here during dark hours. And that's why it's so critical to have food sources. That's why even when you're hunting on public land, if you know that deer are feeding on this oak flat on some remote location out on a big public land chunk, your favorite spot to hunt, maybe they're feeding in neighborhoods, maybe they're feeding on a local golf course in suburban area, you know that you can get into these stand locations while they're feeding somewhere and then get out through those food sources or along those food sources. I hope that makes sense. So we're doing the opposite, when we come in here. One of the things I'll point out is when you go in the morning hours, this is where it gets a little tough. Because when you come in the morning in the dark hours, are they in their bedding areas or not? Kind of a general guideline, if it's windy in the morning, a lot windier than normal in the dark hours, say it gets daylight at 7, you're coming in at 6 o'clock or 6:30, if it's windy, a lot of times those deer are already back in their beds. If it's raining hard, it's going to clear up, you're just getting into your stand so you can wait for that clear up, then likely they're back in their bedding areas already. Something I notice in the morning. Evening, it's almost a guarantee that every deer is back out, unless it's nasty weather and they're just not leaving their beds. But most of the time, 95% of the deer herd are back in those food sources and you can get out through the woods safely. But morning is where it's a little iffy. Again, if it's windy in the morning, they might be in their beds. If it's really rainy in the morning, snowing, blizzard effect, and you're getting into a stand waiting for that clear up, you might want to access through those open areas. Something about the moon. This is the only time I pay attention to the moon. When the moon is rising in the evening, deer are living high on the hog all night. It's safe, social, bright. They can see everything. To me, they feed a lot. Deer are rhythmic pattern feeders. They feed 5 times in a 24-hour period. What does that mean? That means if they gorge themselves at night during the 2 nighttime feedings, when it's after dark, if they gorge themselves, that means that morning feeding that would typically be right around daybreak is taking place back in their bedding areas and is very light. It's kind of like you or I. If we ate a lot here, we're eating less here. Same thing. So when I see that full moon rising in the evening, that means a lot of times those deer are in their beds at daybreak. That means a lot of times I might consider moving through more of an open area to get into a stand location and then waiting for that deer movement to take place on that second feeding of the morning, which would be more mid to late morning. And that's why a lot of times you see a full moon rising in the evening. You see great movement in the afternoon or in the late morning period, because in that daybreak period of feeding, say it's getting late at 7 and they're feeding around 7, whatever time that is, then they're not feeding that much. They're back in their beds, and then you're just coming in waiting for that great feeding period about 4 or 5 hours later to take place. So some of those variables you have to consider in the morning. What's the moon doing? What's the winds doing? What's the weather doing with high winds, rain, snow, whatever it might be. But really after dark, it's really safe. That's why I love those interior woods roads, because when it's dark, pretty easy to slip back out through the dark hours, through the woods, maintain your trails, mow them, we do, before the season. It doesn't grow much into the season. That way when we're walking through those woods roads, we're not leaving much scent. We use rubber boots, use our lacrosse rubber boots. I've used those since, it seems like since I was a kid, but definitely probably around 1990. But we walk in and out through the woods with those, leave very little scent behind. We don't have brush coming up, hitting our side of our legs, and we're not leaving that scent signature all over the woods. Really safe. I mean, we walk through bedding areas sometimes, directly through a bedding area right after dark, getting out of a stand in a direction we would not come in the afternoon to hunt that same setup. So many times I'm going in and out 2 different directions. That's that strategy. It really spreads your pressure around, limit your pressure. You're playing poker in the deer woods. When are the deer here? When is their best chance? When is the best chance here? And you're doing the opposite. And that's how it all boils back down to access, getting in and out without spooking deer. And that will make you a more successful hunter this fall. Sometimes really considering, that doesn't work with every stand location, but really considering, can I get out of the stand in the afternoon through the woods? Can I approach this stand through the woods in the morning? Don't get it in your head so ingrained that you have to go in and out of this stand the same direction, the same way every time, and that'll make you a better hunter this fall and beyond. Hey folks, I really appreciate you watching, and I want to invite you to check out our main website, whitetailhabitatsolutions.com. I'm going to miss all these, but we have seed to offer, hats, articles, web classes, books, consultations, and even a new podcast. I think we have 17 podcasts out there right now for you to listen to. So we have a lot to offer. Most of all, if you don't want to buy anything, I'm going to keep offering free videos, free articles. We have over 600 articles on the site. And most of all, thank you very much for watching, reading, listening, being a part of Whitetail Habitat Solutions. If you want to check this stuff out, awesome. Links are in the description.